LSI 2021 at the beautiful Ritz-Carlton Laguna Niguel. It's nearly true tales of innovation. I'm your host, Benjamin Glenn. Hi, I'm here with my guest, Kwame Ulmer and Jennifer McCaney, the powerhouse of UCLA. Welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
So there's a lot going on at UCLA. Jennifer, why don't you tell us some more about what you've been doing there, the work you've got, and I think you started bringing Kwame into your work at Anderson. Tell us more.
We actually started a UCLA Biodesign curriculum. It's an add-on to our UCLA Biodesign Fellowship Program and our UCLA Biodesign Accelerator. And we started teaching a graduate class for MBA students who are interested in developing novel medical technologies, whether it be diagnostics, digital health, or traditional medical devices. Kwame, what would you say?
I'm just delighted to be a part of it, and it's another example of what's going on in the LA ecosystem, the medtech LA ecosystem. We've seen a lot of capital come in on the pharma and biologic side, but I think it's another example of the promise for this subsector. And I'm just really thrilled that there's a biodesign program in Southern California from a top-tier university.
Are you building sort of an army of skilled people?
That's a great analogy, Ben. I think that it's sort of catch and release, but also we don't want to let them go too far. And actually would be one of our core goals at UCLA Biodesign is to cultivate our future leaders. In particular, when you think about our clinical residents and fellows, we have over 3,300 clinical faculty just at UCLA alone.
Wow.
And when we think about building the future leadership, building what those clinical leaders look like, we've actually drawn our clinical pool of UCLA Biodesign fellows just from our existing residency and fellowship programs, which is unique in that these fellows get exposure across leadership. One fellow ran 2 clinical trials just during 2021 related to COVID. So they're really getting unique experiences in addition to developing novel technology, and then they can carry that on and develop it within the UCLA ecosystem.
Wow, 2 clinical trials during COVID. It makes me feel extraordinarily lazy. Well, what did you do, Ben? I only did 1 clinical trial. I mean, that's amazing. That's incredible that that kind of experience at that early stage of their career, that's going to change the way that they're doing things. That's what one of the things that Kwame and I were talking about is, bringing that end to the front. So thinking about your trial strategy, thinking about reimbursement and payment. Is there any other way that UCLA Health can help the entrepreneurs that come through your system? Do they get a broader view for being there?
That's a great question. And one of the things actually, one of Kwame and I's recent forays, we actually just got a grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, specifically to address pandemic response and pandemic resilience. And really have 4 pillars, which are diagnostics, devices, digital, and health equity. And I think health equity is kind of the big component when we think about kind of the broader community. When we think about Los Angeles, largest, most diverse county in the nation, we want to really bring the health equity lens, not to the time of translation, but the time of innovation. And I think Kwame can speak to that as well with his efforts to grow medtech color across our medtech ecosystem.
Kwame, what would you add?
Well, what we didn't know for sure was how many innovators in medtech there were that were owned, managed, controlled by people of color, and were their solutions unique to their experiences. And what we discovered this year through our inaugural competition, sponsored by ResMed and Johnson & Johnson and other corporate backers, is that there are over 80 companies run by African-American Latinx founders. And sometimes the solutions are born out of their unique experiences and address health equity. So it's been a wonderful hypothesis to test, and we're going to do it again next year.
That's amazing. You think about the idea of the unmet clinical need. That really is a fascinating way to see that sort of that mindset. Where's the unmet need? The unmet need that's coming from my life. The unmet need is coming from my community.
It's an exciting time. One innovator was addressing diabetic foot ulcers, but I think in part is born out of him being African American, where diabetes is prevalent in that community. There's an innovator, wasn't in a competition, working on diagnostics for sickle cell disease, born in part out of their experiences prevalent in the African American community. So I totally agree. It's pregnant with possibility, and we're going to do it again next year.
That sounds very exciting.
We're really interested in closing the gap on research in the medtech community. I think, as an advisor, professor, mentor, I interact with a lot of early stage founders across several verticals, whether it's their regulatory, their reimbursement, their device development. And I think what we see in the medtech community is there's just a gap. There's not a lot of research to say, what does it take to get a novel medtech product to market in 2021? And we've really been fortunate to have a foundation built by Josh Mackauer and some other colleagues at Stanford who did a landmark study in 2010 looking at the regulatory hurdles to get a novel medtech product to market. And I'm very fortunate to have a regulatory expert as a colleague now at UCLA Anderson to help me lead that work.
So to me, it's the state of the industry for, just as Dr. McCaney said, to get a product to market in 2020, this decade. The reason why we need to know that is 10 years ago, digital health was not a prevalent area in our industry. Prescription digital therapeutics, we could go on and on, technology to help people heal in the home. So I'm just excited to be a part of this, and I can't tell you how enthusiastic we are about collecting the data and getting the research out.
You need a lot of companies, a few companies. What kind of information you're going to gather? What are you looking to bring into this?
We have an ambitious goal of reaching over 200 companies to have a robust data set that we think is representative. So we don't just want to capture people in Northern California or Minneapolis. We want to get startups in Philadelphia like Stratos, who just got a 510K, or based in Kentucky. So we want a breadth. And we also want depth. So we are having interviews that are taking about 30 minutes. So it's sitting across the table from the head of regulatory affairs that can collect the quantitative information, how long it actually take for you to get your clearance, the qualitative information, what was your perception of the predictability of it, things of that nature. And then we ask questions about the new reimbursement for breakthrough designation. So we try and be relevant for where regulations and reimbursements and investment stands for companies in this decade. And some of those concepts are new.
Anything to add, Jennifer?
Yeah, Kwame, I think that's a great way to kick off and describe the study. And I mean, one of the other things, the hypotheses we have is there's new kind of device archetypes, new product archetypes. And I think about that kind of in three categories. There's, your traditional standalone medical device, your implant. But when you think about the implant of 2021 and beyond, it's probably going to be a connected implant. And so that's kind of the second category. You have connected, digitally enabled med tech products. And when I think about the third category, it's really the standalone digital products, your software as a medical device. And so we're really seeking to interview companies across these three I almost said silos, but I didn't, across these three sectors within the medtech industry, because I think what we'll see is they're going to have very different regulatory experiences and perhaps reimbursement experiences. And we're really looking at trying to better understand, but also quantify from a structured independent research study to look at what are those different hurdles, what are those different barriers, but also what are some of the facilitators such that other companies can learn from the collective knowledge of their peers.
So Kwame, before we talked about in your work helping to right size sort of talent to fit, do you hire, borrow or hire? And are you finding that you think this will also provide more information about that for these different segments is the word, the segments of new devices that are being approved? Is the talent mix different?
I think that's a really good point. I do think it'll shed some light in that area, and I'll tell you why. We ask questions about the size of your company at that point when you're engaging with the FDA. We also are looking at some investment data, so we can have a sense for if a company raised $1 million, they probably didn't hire a direct sales force,
Yeah.
and they probably had a lean team. So that is really, Ben, thank you for asking that. That is a potential aha we can get out of this to get a sense for, are companies hiring a lot of consultants, or are they bringing a lot of people in-house? If so, when?
Can be super important. I mean, that's one way to trim the burn is you do a lot of things with external consultants or have them, rather than building building an engineering team, borrow an engineering team. And I think that can change the burn on a company really quickly. What else is going to come out of this study? What other hype, I think, Jennifer, when we talked about it before, you have some anecdotal information already, which I was pretty surprised at, but if there's any of that you can share.
Well, I don't want to break any news before the data's in, but I think that what we're finding is there's the small company perspective and the large company perspective, and often those are two very different viewpoints when you're looking at regulation. In particular, even let's look at MDR, for example. What's happening in Europe. We're really looking to understand the experience of companies who can they afford to get a CE mark now because of restrictions with in-country representation, with translation burdens, and a host of other new sort of clinical requirements associated with getting CE mark. Certainly we would think that bigger companies are better poised to do so, but emerging startups looking at getting their first product to market are now potentially choosing a US first strategy, which is a departure from the last decade, I would say.
I think this is going to be helpful because one of the key questions with the prior study was what are driving companies to launch in Europe first? And now we'll be able to take a fresh look, and just as Dr. McCaney said, and see what has been the result of all the regulatory reforms over the last decade to drive US first work. So I will tell you, when I was at the FDA, there was a right-sizing calibration of focusing on incentivizing and streamlining clinical trials so that there could be more US first clinical studies. And this was explicit. This is something you can Google. Now we can look back over the last 10 years and see what really happened. And now with MDR, just as Dr. McCaney said, what potential impact would that have on where people launch first?
That's very interesting. I definitely remember that whenever, because we would have patent strategies set up for, start in the US, then you go to maybe Europe, then you start looking at Japan, maybe China, those kinds of things. And all of a sudden, the US slowed down, almost stopped, dare I say, logjam. And all of a sudden, it was going to be CE mark. We'll lead with Europe. They find a center of excellence. There's so much talent in Europe, and they would just find a center of excellence, and all of a sudden, we're going to go CE mark right off the top. So anyway, it's wonderful that you're going to help us with this data, get back to a US first launch strategy. I love that. So thanks very much for your time. It's been great having you in the studio.
Always been. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.